Good afternoon, friends. It's a completely different experience when one speaks to long time people who've been a long time in Auroville. It's completely different. So my conversation with you is going to be a conversation, but it's going to be about what it means to be here. First, I would like to say that it's such an extraordinary grace to be part of this journey, to have had the possibility to be selected to be here. There is a final conversation that Mother has with a group of Aurovillians. It's actually Nava, Udar and Roger. It's in, I think, 73, where she says, "You don't know why you are here. You are here to be united. Heroism is to be united." If we look at some of the messages that Mother gives for Auroville, it's all about union, not identity. There's a really interesting conversation of Mother in the agenda where she's looking at the difference between identity and union. And she says, in the beginning, when the universe begins, there is the oneness of identity. Then you do the full circuit. We are all in the circuit right now, and we seem to be going through much more a dark passage than a passage filled with light. At the end of the circuit, it's a union of, not, the oneness is a union of union, meaning you do not separate the individuality. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. The union remains oneness, but it's the oneness of multiplicity, where each individual finds their totality of being, which is a being of divinity, but the individual doesn't disappear. It becomes the truth of what the whole journey of manifestation was meant to be. So I find that so interesting, because if you look at Indian spiritual thought, it is aimed at disappearing. But this yoga is nothing to do with disappearing, it is to do with self-finding. So what is this adventure? Mother says, I invite you to this adventure, and we are not going to do what others do, because this is an adventure that begins beyond what has been done up to now. What does she mean by that? Because in this particular manifestation, Sri Aurobindo has a mysterious remark where he talks about there have been other manifestations. This is not the first time that the experiment of human life has taken place. So anyway, this particular manifestation is, at another point, Mother says, the seventh, and it will not disappear. It will continue to grow into that union, the state of union. And that requires each of us to find our true individuality. When I look at what Mother and Sri Aurobindo have said, and I look at it again, I have to put aside everything that I've understood about spirituality up to now. Because up to now, largely all over the world, if there has been a spiritual pursuit, it has been finally to abandon manifestation. The idea is that the earth is mithya, is maya. It is, even in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, anityam asukham lokam. It's a world that's filled with sorrow and suffering. So all the solutions, even the solution at the time of Sri Krishna, the followers of Sri Krishna are Vaishnavites. They too leave their bodies and they go to an eternal world called Golok Dham. Never before has there been a proposal of a spiritual journey which is so integral, which aims at manifesting the life divine upon earth. And the laws of such a journey are completely different to whatever has been proposed before. So if we look at, finally, if we want to understand Auroville, we have to turn to what has been said by Mother when she founded Auroville. So the text is the Auroville Charter. And then a few years later, when Aurovillians begin to say, okay, why are we here? What are we here to do? And as a result of that question, what are called aspiration talks, what emerges is to be a true Aurovillian. It's 6 points. It starts with the first necessity being finding your psychic being, and it ends with the new world, with a new creation. So there are 4 points that belong to the human stage, and the last 2 points belong to the new creation. So in just those 4 points, she's already taken us beyond anything that humanity has ever considered as in their aspiration to do something. So if we look at to be a true Aurovillian, if we look at the charter, the yoga is complete in each of those things. Those texts. They are absolute mantric texts, and they contain so many, physics, science has arrived at the idea that opposite truths confirm each other. They call them complementarities. So if you look at are invited to Auroville all people of goodwill, we all say we are people of goodwill, though the moment someone provokes us, that's the first thing we lose. It's very hard to remain good-willed when life circumstances are creating difficulties for you, and often the difficulties come from other individuals. So goodwill is a yogic condition. It's not something that we naturally embody. So she says, I invited to Auroville people of goodwill. This she says long before Auroville starts. She also says, before Auroville starts, that the spirit of Auroville has not yet been grounded in matter. And so when you look at the launching of Auroville by 1968, there's been such a progression from 1964, when the idea is first, actually it's a very old idea. She thought of it even before she came to Aurobindo. She had always dreamed of creating a city of God, and actually this idea of creating a city that would be at the service of the truth, of bringing down a higher force, is present in all spiritual journeys. The idea of creating a perfect society, it's one of the oldest dreams of humanity. But she always thought of creating a city with Aurobindo at the center. And then she put aside the idea when Aurobindo left his body. Then the idea began to come forward. I have always felt the idea of Auroville is profoundly linked to the manifestation of this new consciousness that took place on the 29th of February 1956. This is what the whole yoga of Aurobindo and Mother. Sometimes, people think that Aurobindo, he came to Pondicherry in 1910. In 1926, he withdraws. He writes lots of letters, but he doesn't come out of his room. What was he doing? Exactly, what was he doing for 40 years in Pondi? He was trying to bring down into manifestation this new principle. Finally, he had to go into death, go to the other side and work from there, and Mother remains in manifestation, and together they try to bring this new consciousness down. Because Aurobindo says that until I bring this new principle. So he accepts the Vedantic idea of a sevenfold world. There's the upper hemisphere of Sachidananda. There is the lower hemisphere of mind, life and body. And then there is this fourth plane, fourth from above, fourth from below, which is, the Veda calls it the Turiam Swidh. Aurobindo calls it the supermind, Vijnana. And he argues from the very beginning that unless this plane is brought into manifestation, it is there, it is present in each of our consciousness, because each of us is linked to all 7 planes. But manifestation becomes, it becomes the dharma of the earth, that this principle is now active in earthly manifestation. So this principle has to be brought down. Through the 30s, he's talking about, I have the tail of the supermind, and he cannot bring it into manifestation. So many things intervene. In 1933, I think it is, that Hitler comes to power, and suddenly something is growing. Fascism is growing in Italy, and Nazism is growing. You have Stalin in Russia. Somehow energies and powers that seem to be completely opposed to bringing something beautiful into manifestation are running the earth, large parts of it. And Sri Aurobindo and Mother begin to focus on dealing with that. And there is a period in the ashram where both Sri Aurobindo and Mother have to say, please do not even think in your consciousness that the Germans are our friends, because as long as Nazism is in charge of Germany, it is dangerous for the earth, it is dangerous for Mother's yoga, Mother's manifestation of the new consciousness. You know that the Indians at that time, because they're wanting to get the British out, felt the enemy of the enemy is a friend. And both Sri Aurobindo and Mother begin to say things publicly for the first time, which is something that Sri Aurobindo hasn't done from 1910 till the Stafford Cripps mission to India, which is proposing dominion status for India. Sri Aurobindo has not said anything publicly to India. At that time, he sends an official telegram, which is why one has to recognize how important it is for India. Look at this distortion that has taken place, the division, the partition of India. We are still paying the price of that. So, union has certain laws. There are certain conditions that can create union, and other conditions that create human distortions that can last decades, if not centuries, to allow the possibility for something new to come back. Auroville, the creation of Auroville, Mother says, to start with, is an attempt to prevent war. If we look at it from that point of view, Auroville has not prevented war. So what does she mean? Actually, in the 60s, there was this major worry in the world about a nuclear conflagration. We are right in the middle right now of the anniversary of the 6th of August and the 9th of August, when the two nuclear devices that were dropped upon populations took place, so Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The fact that it hasn't happened again is one of the miracles that we don't pay attention to, one of the graces that guide the world. So there are small conflicts, not so small for the people who are in them, but there hasn't been a worldwide conflict. And perhaps Auroville has played a role in that, perhaps Auroville has not played enough of the role that it should have. This is a question that we should ask ourselves in Auroville, because the aim of Auroville is union. And that has certain laws. There are things we are not allowed to do to each other to allow Auroville to come down into manifestation completely. But still, Mother says, what is needed is a piece of earth. And that piece of earth is given. This area is consecrated. It's interesting that when Sri Aurobindo is explaining what is asked for from the individual, and I think that's true for the collective also, he uses the word, in one of his letters, I think it's a letter to Dilip, he says that surrender is not, he's not satisfied with the word surrender. He says samarpan. So arpan is to be completely given. You belong to the divine. So what this yoga asks for is samarpan, a complete giving over where you do not belong to yourself anymore, you do not belong to your ego, you belong to the divine. And it is the divine who acts through you. In in the period of the Arya, because Aurobindo did most of his writing between 1914 and 1920. After that, he refuses to write another book. There are 8 volumes of his letters where he explains what the yoga is, but he no longer writes prose. What he's focused on is poetry, because he feels that poetry embodies his consciousness much more powerfully than prose does. Poetry, this pattern of rhythm, rhyme, meter, style, substance, vision, which is what Savitri represents, as we are sitting in the home of Savitri. That is what embodies what he's saying. And if you notice with poetry, there is never prescriptions. You get a description and you can interpret it. So this freedom Aurobindo has given to all his disciples to take what he says, in whichever form he says it, and interpret it and try to understand it each in their own way. So Mother says, I insist on the fact that each one, she says, life itself growing and perfecting itself, each one in their own way. Above all, she says, each one in their own way. What does that mean? It's not the thought, it's not mystical means, it is life. And each of us expresses a unique form of manifestation in our embodiment, in our life, and that is the truth of what we need to find. So we cannot create prescriptive guidances, and so that's a contradiction. We have to be willing servitors of the divine consciousness, but each one in their own way. That's kind of like an impossible task. How do you know that you are serving? To be able to know you are serving, you have to be given. You cannot make choices for yourself. The choices are made by circumstance. Even the Bible says there is within us always a still small voice. The only way we can hear this voice, which is the voice of the psychic being, the Bible doesn't specify. Nobody speaks about the psychic being. Everyone speaks about soul, but because the psychic being comes into the picture if we are wanting to create an earthly life, which is a life divine. Because the psychic is an evolutionary soul. It is the one that's evolved from material inconscience. It's the spark of the soul. It's a spark soul. And by the time it comes to the human consciousness, it is capable of being a being, not a spark, meaning it has developed a form which is a state of being. So one of the things I think we have to reflect on is, what is the difference between being and doing? Can our doing emerge from a strong center of being? The Upanishads are constantly focusing on the difference between being and becoming. Becoming is the way mind, life and body flows out of us, and it's a process, it's in a movement, but at the center there is a still center, and that's the center of being. And she asks us as a first step to find that center, which is the still center. Again, there is not much advice that people say. I have heard Aurovillians say that, what are the steps this yoga demands? Because in other yoga systems you're given advice, you should meditate, you should do this. In fact, Mother makes a remark about Auroville that meditation is not much use. No, I mean, absolutely we have to learn how to meditate, but what she's meaning is our meditation itself has to be dynamic. It is in life itself that in whatever we are doing, we should be just alone with the divine. One must know how to be alone with the divine in the midst of all circumstances. That's the victory. If when you are doing 1,000 things, if when the world is coming at you, it's attacking you, if at that moment you can be in this still center, then you are in meditation. That means a dynamic meditation. The center of Auroville, Mother says, is called peace, but she says it's a dynamic peace. So what is the difference between static peace and a dynamic peace? Which means you carry the peace with you in whatever circumstances. And in some ways, that's what Sri Krishna is telling Arjuna to do. In the Bhagavad Gita, what is Arjuna being asked to do? It's one of the most, or the most terrible work that you can ask another human being to do. It's a ghoram kartavyam. He's being asked to kill. But Sri Krishna tells him, you are merely the instrument of the moment, nimita matram. Those who have to go will go regardless. It is destined that they have to die. Your choice is to be the instrument or not. So in some ways, how to embody instrumentality is the question that each of us must ask. And as long as we have a personal preference, as long as we have an inclination, as long as we prefer this to that, we are not an instrument. We are guided by the ego. Aurobindo says that the ego is a helper. It helps you to individualize. The moment you are individualized, it becomes the bar, it becomes the block. Aurobindo speaks about 4 master knots in human consciousness that we have to get over. So the first is desire. The Buddha gets caught by that idea. He says the world has come into being because of desire. And therefore, you need to abandon this world of desire and find a solution in moksha and nirvana. It is true. Desire is the first. It's what impels you and what moves you forward. But the Upanishad says it's not desire that gives birth to the world. It is delight. So the manifestation has been created for delight, for ananda. And that is what Aurobindo bases himself. So behind that first movement of desire, when you transcend the individual response, it becomes something much higher. So desire is a master knot. It has to be converted to its truth. Nothing can be removed from manifestation. It has to be transmuted into its truth. The second set of master knots are the gunas. Tamas, Rajas, Sattva. Now in India, we have been brought up to believe that the sattvic consciousness is the best. Right now in India, there's a great celebration of Ram. Aurobindo says the Ramachandra, the temple that's just been made in Ayodhya, represents the sattvic consciousness. So it's a mental consciousness. And the standard in India, the value in India has been for sattva. The best you can achieve is a sattvic consciousness. Not if you're doing yoga. In yoga, you can transcend this. But ordinary people, the demand for ordinary Indians has been become sattvic. Do not be dominated by Rajas and Tamas. The Gita says no, you have to be seated above the gunas. You have to be Tregunatita. He's telling, Sri Krishna is telling Arjuna, you have to be seated above the gunas and you use the guna that you need. Aurobindo says that each of these gunas in the lower principle, tamas, on the higher principle, is the capacity for absolute peace, sum. So we have to convert the tamas, that's the obscurity in us, into the power of peace. And that's peace is a power. Peace is the first thing we have to bring into our consciousness. Rajas, converted, becomes tapas and tejas, the fire and the force of the divine manifesting through us. Aurobindo's yoga demands a lot of tapas and tejas. So that has to be found. We cannot be, just sitting quietly in meditation. We have to energize everything. Energy is the source. And sattva, converted, becomes jyoti, the spiritual light. So the second master knot are the gunas, and they have to be transmuted, converted to their higher truth. The third master knot is dualities, this idea that this is good, this is bad, this is better, this is worse. There is a state of consciousness where you go beyond these dualities and you inhabit a wholeness, what modern quantum physics talks about, complementarities. So it's coming at us. We are living in a world where a certain level of consciousness is touching these truths. And we have to try to find a way to embody them. So the dualities. And of course, the last master knot is the ego. In this yoga, unlike all the other yogas, you have to work on these master knots. In traditional yogas, you sit upon them. You just quieten them. You tell them, behave yourself. You're not going to interfere. But you don't transmute them. You don't change them. So they're sitting there. So Aurobindo has a remark where he says, even the saint, you catch him in his ordinary state and all these tendencies can emerge at any moment. It's not satisfactory for Aurobindo that these tendencies that come with the material substance remain. There's a really interesting conversation in the agenda where Satprim tells the mother, you know, I have the feeling we betray you all the time. And she says, Maupati, I betray myself. What does she mean by that? What is mother saying? Because her physicality is still tied to the lower creation, is still death-bound. She embodies the highest divine consciousness in that body, but the body is finding it hard to keep up, which is why at some point in time, for whatever reason, that body gets abandoned because it's not able to be plastic enough. The new consciousness, the supramental state, the demand, the fundamental demand is plasticity. And if we look at all our bodies, all of us old-time Aurovillians, our bodies are less young now and they are less responsive. The bones are a bit calcified and that energy we had when we were in our 20s and 30s, it's less present now. So in spite of all the aspiration we have, there is something about the body we have not changed. And the body ages, and because it ages, Aurobindo calls it an obstinate habit, but that habit seems to be millennially present in our bodies. And that creates an issue for this yoga. Because even the Upanishad says, you have to live 100 years. The Isha Upanishad invokes, may we live 100 summers doing works in the world. Auroville has managed to catch that a little bit because people don't retire in Auroville. And so you have 90-year-olds who are still cycling if their bodies allow them to. There is a youthfulness in Auroville which is very eternal in some ways, and that is magical about this society, that there is no retirement. I find that it helps a lot to look for the magic in the circumstances, even in the most difficult of circumstances. There is a line in Savitri where Aurobindo says, all here is miracle and can by miracle change. So it's an attitude also. If we can see the miraculousness of what we are part of the grace that we are part of, then somehow that comes forward. She's even called that flower that grows wild in the forests of Auroville, miracle, and the second word is the air of Auroville. So even though Auroville looks presently as if it's going through a very difficult phase, that magic, that air of Auroville, that miraculousness of this experiment is still completely present, and we should be connected to that regardless of what's happening outwardly. And that connection creates another law of personal life and living, because whether the collectivity can do that, we as individuals can do that, and then we feed that energy into the collectivity. Because we say in India, Jyot se Jyot. It is only a flaming light that can light another flaming light. So if we can be this flaming fire of consciousness, then somehow that truth of Auroville, which has not diminished even the least bit, it is completely present. We should have the faith. How to stay in that faith? Two things. To remain enthusiastic. You know, the Greek word enthusiasm means theos is God, and entheos is to be filled with the God energy. So when you're enthusiastic, there you are channeling the God energy, and to be grateful. So if we can keep enthusiasm and gratitude, somehow it puts us into the right space and right consciousness to allow, to channel whatever is possible through us, in us and outward into the world around us. That is the demand of each individual. And if there would be enough individuals, another thing in India we talk about is satsanga, the company of the good. So if we can create that energizing of consciousness, where anyone who comes in contact with any of us is immediately uplifted. Mother says, don't hang around with people who pull you down. Don't be with people who make you lose your faith. Be with people who fill you with the faith in the future, because there is no doubt, not because of what we are doing or not doing, but because of what the work that Mother and Aurobindo completed. It is because of that that we can hope for a beautiful future. So I thought that I will speak to you a little bit about Aurobindo's diary notes, which were not found in his lifetime, which were not even found in Mother's lifetime, which later the ashram archives discovered its papers. There are stories that Puranida, he had to light the boiler early morning, and he finds all these papers, and he finds sometimes in the papers these handwritten notes of Aurobindo, and he rescues them. This cannot be burnt, but so this was stuff that Aurobindo was even giving for burning. But thanks to those who rescued these papers, we have something called, because everyone says, what is this yoga asking us to do? Aurobindo gave himself a program which he called the Shanti Chhatushtaya, which means the 7 fours. Now this is a program that he's putting upon himself. He has not, here and there in his writings, he refers to this here and something else there, but he doesn't elaborate it too much. These are siddhis that he is trying to achieve in his physical consciousness, and he largely succeeds. The Shanti Chhatushtaya, which means it's 28 and almost 30 siddhis. So in this yoga, there is the necessity for shuddhi, which is something that we Aurovillians neglect, which is a journey of purification. There are things that you are allowed to do, and there are things you're not allowed to do, but you have to figure this out yourself. Nobody's telling you. You have to purify yourself. You have to remove from your consciousness things that are no longer necessary and useful. Shuddhi brings mukti, which is liberation. Shuddhi is purification. Mukti is liberation. The more you are freed of your lower nature, the more you are liberated from your lower nature, and that leads to siddhi, which means realization. And then Aurobindo, these are the 3 things that all yogas ask you for. You have to be liberated from your lower nature. Even if you sit upon it, you don't transform it. In Aurobindo's yoga, you have to transform it. Last, bhukti. So in Aurobindo, the necessity of delight in manifestation is a 4th layer that Aurobindo adds. In the synthesis, he follows in the synthesis the program that Sri Krishna gives Arjuna. He offers 3 yoga systems, which are psycho-spiritual, the yoga of divine works, the yoga of divine knowledge, and the yoga of divine love. And Sri Aurobindo adds a fourth layer, which is the yoga of self-perfection. So that fourth layer is what Sri Aurobindo is offering to the world. It's a yoga that has never been elaborated. It is there as intuitions in the Veda and the Upanishad, but it required it to be brought down into manifestation by a complete structure of pattern of growth and development. And so in the yoga of self-perfection, he talks about these four states that we have to bring into manifestation. So I thought I would talk to you about just the first, the Sapta Chhatushtaya, but the first Chhatushtaya, which he calls Shanti or Samata Chhatushtaya. A couple of years, last year I think, I did this book for Bharat Nivas, which was a kind of an exploration of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. If any of you want it, I can send it to you as a PDF. It's lying as printed copies in Bharat Nivas. I no longer have a say on it, but it was exploring Sri Aurobindo's yoga in short, so that people can find what Sri Aurobindo is saying in a nutshell. So he calls it Samata, Shanti, Sukham, Hasyam, Iti Shanti Chhatushtaya, and it's step 1. And there are 6 other steps to be achieved. He says then, because in his yoga, the first thing that we have to achieve to settle into our consciousness is samatha, is absolute, total equality. The yoga cannot work in us if we are slightly disturbed and shaken. So it has to be samatha. There are 2 forms of samatha, he says. There is a passive form and an active form. Samatha, the passive form is when things come at you, and samatha, the active form, is how you react to them. So there are 2 responses that we can have. So the passive form is titiksha, udasinata, nati, iti samatha. So titiksha is the capacity for endurance. If you look at Western psychology, you have the Stoic philosophy. The Stoic philosophy is the capacity to endure whatever life throws at you. And if you look at Sri Aurobindo's life, the capacity to endure difficulty without complaining, neither mother nor he complained. Sometimes Satprem says to mother that you take everything so lightly. She says, when it's most serious, I laugh. And this is how Sri Aurobindo also deals with difficulties in life. He laughs. Because it's a good response to difficulty. You laugh about it. So titiksha is the capacity to endure. Once you have the capacity to endure whatever life throws at you, it doesn't matter, you touch the transcendence of the gunas, udasinata. You seat yourself above the gunas. So first you have to endure, then you have to seat yourself above the gunas, which means none of these gunas control your consciousness. You stand above them and you're always in peace. So mother says you have to be like a mountain. Anything that comes at the mountain, it observes it coming, but it is not disturbed. It's solid, it's dynamically there. After you have achieved titiksa and udasinata, you arrive at this process of self-giving, nati, you are given. And Sri Aurobindo says, this is passive samatha, iti samatha. Now, what about the active? He explains in his, I've taken this out of his diary notes in the record of yoga. The active principle is rasa, Pritir, Ananda, Iti Sarvananda. So, in India we have something that we call the Navarasas, meaning the 9 flavors that life comes at you. And if you look at all the dancers, and most art in India, in the traditional sense, was hierarchic. It was expressing an aspiration for the divine. And actually you will hear a lot of traditional artists saying that their art is their yoga. They're doing their art as a yoga. And so in some ways, if you follow the traditional Indian approach, it is a kind of a yoga. And people are quite conscious of that. Unfortunately, the world is becoming one, and so people are losing even the contact with these great Indian ideas. So there are flavors that life comes at you with, and that is the flavor and the taste of life, how you taste it. And you have to be there are 9, it's called Navarasas, but there are 8, and 8 includes something that can bring disgust, something that can bring fear, something that can bring courage. But the 9th is Shanti. So it's when you achieve all of the 8 that you arrive at the state of complete peace, Shanti. And that is the 9th flavor. So first you have to, Sri Aurobindo says, if there is the least disturbance or trouble in the mentality, we may be perfectly sure that there is a disturbance or defect in the samatha. The buddhi, the manas, the heart, the nerves, the very bodily case must be subjected to the laws of samatha. Shanti may be a vast calm based on udasinata, or a vast joyous calm based on nati, when you are self-given, when you have samarpan yourself. The former is apt to associate itself with a tendency to inaction, and it is therefore the latter, the self-giving, that we need for our yoga. So he says, not enough, the first one, no? Because that creates passivity, and in his yoga there cannot be passivity. It has to be always active. Preetir is whatever life gives to you, you turn it into something very joyful. You receive it, even if the most painful touch. There is this story when Sri Aurobindo fell and broke his hip. It was dislocated. So it must have been frightfully painful. And because it is Sri Aurobindo doesn't call for help. Sri Aurobindo doesn't ask people to do things. They have to notice. His attendants had to always notice what he needed. He never said, do this. And so somebody finds him on the floor and said, what were you doing for that time when nobody found him? He says, I was converting the pain into fierce ananda, raudra ananda. So he's not wasting his time. He has this terrible pain of a broken hip, fever, and he's converting it into delight, into fierce ananda. So whatever comes at you, you can convert it. You don't have to respond in the way it's coming. This is Sri Aurobindo's example. So it should turn into preetir and delight, joy, fullness. The amount of importance Sri Aurobindo and Mother give to beauty and delight. This yoga is all about beauty and delight. Mother's telling the ashram kids in education, let beauty be your constant presence. Beauty of thought, beauty of sentiment, beauty of action, beauty around you. And she's given us so much. Look at this. This is bird of paradise. This is fire. Depending on the color of the flower, it's a different type of fire. You look at Mother Nature, and she has given us a kind of a conscious contact with nature that no other yoga gives us. And that's so, so powerful. In the synthesis of yoga, Sri Aurobindo has a paragraph where he's referring to this first Chhatushtaya, the Shanti Chhatushtaya. The final stage is Hasyam. He says, Hasyam is the active side of Sukham. It consists in an inner state of gladness, cheerfulness, which no adverse experience, mental or physical, can trouble. Its perfection is the stamp and seal of God on the siddhi of the samatha. So you have to be laughing all the time. And Sri Aurobindo says, a humorous God could not have created this universe, so you have to laugh with him. In the synthesis of yoga, he doesn't call it the Chhatushtaya, but he says that if you want to measure that you are in the yoga, this is what you need. There are 4 things that the sadhak must have. First, equality. In the most concrete, practical sense of the word, samatha. Freedom from mental, vital, physical preferences, an even acceptance of all God's workings within and around him. This is so hard for Aurovillians right now. We do not have an even acceptance of what God, because finally whatever is happening in manifestation, in the end there is the one who is somehow in charge and is using this way because it seems to be the shortest way to arrive at solution. Sometimes you have to take a dark passage to arrive at a solution. So we have to have a complete acceptance of all God's workings within and around him. That's number one. Secondly, a firm peace and absence of all disturbance and trouble, Shanti. Thirdly, a positive inner spiritual happiness and spiritual ease of the natural being which nothing can lessen. Meaning, at whatever life throws at you, you have a spiritual ease, you have a well-being because you're seated on the lap of the mother. Sukham, Sri Aurobindo calls that. And fourthly, a clear joy and laughter of the soul, embracing life and existence. To be equal is to be infinite and universal, not to limit oneself, not to bind oneself down to this or that form of the mind and life and its partial preferences and desires. That's step one. So there is a program, there is a process, and I wish we Aurovillians would seek it, look at it, try to understand it and try to embody it. We have a lot of work to do.